Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and a very warm welcome to all of you who have actually joined this afternoon in connection with our World Mental Health Day seminar. I'm Raghavan. I'm a professor of mental health at the Montfort University, leading the Mary Seacole Research Center, which focuses on mental health, culture, and diversity research. Mental health is actually everybody's responsibility, and every one of us actually have the responsibility to actually create our own mental health and well-being. As you know, life all over the world has been affected by the COVID pandemic over the last year, and it continues to actually have an impact on the negatively on mental health and well-being of the population around us and also throughout the world. In this context, GMU's 2021 World Mental Health Day event focuses on culture, diversity, and well-being. We have four excellent speakers handpicked for this session. First of all, Dr. Girish Kunagiri will actually talk about well-being among young adults during the pandemic, followed by Dr. Nadya Sridhanka, who is going to talk about cultural mental health, diversity, and inclusion in research for equitable and sustainable impact. And then Dorian Joseph will focus on globalizing psychiatry, not the best medicine. And finally, Professor Brown will actually talk about beyond carer burden, making sense of symptoms and services when a loved one has a problem. So we will have take the questions at the end of the session. We will have a panel discussion. So I would initially invite Dr. Girish Kunagiri to do the first presentation for this World Mental Health Day 2021 event, and he's going to talk about well-being among young adults during the pandemic. So Dr. Kunagiri is a deputy director at Leicestershire Partnership NHS Trust and a clinical director for East Midlands Mental Health Network. He's a practicing consultant psychiatrist in Leicester, and his area of interest is actually depression. He has established the Neuromodulation Center in Leicester that involves novel treatments such as transcranial magnetic stimulation and the vagus nerve stimulation in depression. Pleasure to have you with us, Dr. Girish, and he's actually going to talk about well-being among young adults during the pandemic, a key theme aimed at university students.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the introduction, and hello to everyone. First of all, I need to thank Professor Raghavan for providing me an opportunity to talk to you all on this very important day. Many of you are already aware of what is called as No Health Without Mental Health. This is a government document which was released many years ago. And as Professor Raghavan was already saying, that everyone has the responsibility in terms of looking after his or her own mental health and also the mental health of the community. What I will be presenting today is to briefly go through, what well-being is among the university students, particularly in UK, and some of the stress related to uni life, which obviously has exacerbated during the pandemic. And I'm glad that we are slowly normalizing, and I'm sure you would have seen how fortunate you are to come back to the university life again. I just wanted to have this a brief interactive session. I just wanted to know from you all. You can use your chat box and say, what do you mean by well-being for yourself? What is your understanding? I mean, if you take about 20 seconds or so to respond to me, that will be really great. Because we often use this term, well-being, stress, coping, and in terms of mental health. But what is your understanding about well-being? I'm not sure if anyone is typing. I can't see on my screen, at least. But well-being is nothing but feeling good about yourself, feeling positive, and feeling being optimistic. And people who generally feel good about themselves, their productivity, and also in terms of their performance, will be much effective. And you will perform the best. When you feel that you are feeling good about yourself. And how many of you actually agree that uni life is the best, compared to all other years? You can just show you a thumbs up in the chat. In fact, if you have put your thumbs up, you're very true. There's a lot of work which has gone on across the world in terms of looking at the well-being and life satisfaction among different age groups. And repeatedly, the studies have shown that the university life, particularly in the age group of 18 to 25, they somehow seem to have the best part of their life. And probably when they reach about mid 50s, or somewhere towards the early 50s, they go into what many of us call as midlife crisis, where they start reevaluating, and then again, once they start moving further, they feel more satisfied in their life. And there is a very large study which was conducted in Leeds, interviewing so many students, and they did identify that university life was best because of three reasons. My daughter has also just gone into the uni, and I can see, some of these in her as well, which makes the uni life best. And I'm sure many of it will associate your personal experience as well. One is being independent, having that freedom and having that liberty. More importantly is having the opportunity to meet enormous number of friends. You will get all kinds of friends in your university, which is amazing. And some of these friends will become your close friends for your life. And there will be few who will have your university friends as your partners as well. And then the third thing, which has obviously contributed to the life satisfaction in uni life, is you having the ability to learn what you actually wanted to do. Many of you, I guess, have got the university of your first choice, and or the subject, where you wanted to throw yourself in and into your life. However, uni life is not always the same for everyone, and that is when people do get stressed. Again, this is another term which is very commonly used as well. Stress is nothing but a situation where you feel little uncomfortable, where you feel that you are not fully in control of it, and where the situation is which is different from what is your normal. And people can experience this stress, which is not very unique. I mean, even I was very surprised that recently when I went to take my son to the tuitions, there was a boy who was just in his reception or year one, and he was telling his mummy that I'm feeling stressed. It is really interesting that even at this young generation, people are able to experience this concept of stress. And the reasons why you see stress could be many. I mean, I just want to use my time to talk about this rather than having these interactive discussions. But some of the common reasons why people feel stressed is on the screen. I mean, again, you can relate that the level of stress is different at different years of your university life, and also the context and the background from which you come from also explain to the stressful situations you are in. I mean, some of the common things I can relate to myself as well was living home. This was the first opportunity I had got to leave the home. And obviously, I having to manage everything on my own was very, very daunting. The secondly, our pocket is not always full. We need more and more money. And I do know that some of the university students will have to work, to become financially independent as well. And Although there are lots of good things and you want to read the subject of your choice, any subject you take, that also comes with stress, in terms of having your routine exams, in terms of doing your modules, and it may not be for everyone at every time. Other thing which people in the uni life do present as a challenge is to check themselves whether they fit into the group with whom they are in, and as a result of that, they sometimes feel isolated, and it can also be contributed by their pre-existing personality in terms of whether they are introvert or extrovert, or how their general self-esteem is, how their confidence levels is, and also in terms of equality and diversity. When people are coming to these universities, they think a lot about whether they would be the right match to their flatmates, to the group with whom they will be interacting with. And I'm sure none of us like doing this mundane housework in terms of cleaning, cooking, washing, and so on. But more importantly, the stress can also arise from the peer. It's a very important factor. Subjecting yourself into situations where you are not comfortable with, or doing something which you don't approve with it. Like, for example, lending money, or in terms of sharing things which you don't want to, or indulging in activities which you don't want to, like drinking, using drugs, or involving in sexual activities, and so on. Sometimes, that peer pressure can also be stressful to some. And in some, it is ongoing family pressure as well, particularly those who are from the Asian background, although they are distanced from the family home, but the pressure may still be there, particularly those who are finishing their uni. Uncertainty, job outlooks, particularly during the pandemic, has been a quite stressful situations. And those students who have chronic physical health issues or chronic mental health issues, again, it is not so easy to sail through the university life. These are some of the statistics in the literature. I was very surprised that nearly half of the students at any given point do feel stressed, for various reasons we have already discussed. And those universities who have good mental health support, the stress levels are generally less, which is really positive. And the other thing which was alarming is in terms of the university students contemplating having these suicidal thoughts, which also seems to be a bit high. And then alcohol and drug use. I mean, this has been a problem for many years, and sadly, yeah, it has been increasing. And as you can see, nearly half of the university students do use alcohol, which is more than the standard what is recommended, and more than half do use cannabis, and nearly 20% of them use at least once or twice every week. And there are about one third of the university population who do use different kinds of drugs. So all this will obviously contribute to different kind of mental health problems for which they may need help. So what what is also important for you is to recognize, if you're having stress, because two things. What is very, very important is you are not on your own. There are many people who do go through these stressful situations, yeah, and in majority it is only for a transient period of time. uh, you know or you can sometimes see this stress, among your colleague, and you do have a responsibility to look after yourself and also to look after your community if they are going through the stressful situations. These are not rocket science. I mean, you can see that when you are stressed, as I was saying in the beginning, you may feel little out of control or feeling a bit uncomfortable. Many feel having these anxiety symptoms, like having the tensed muscles, or having headache, or having some palpitations and sweating. Or on the other hand, you may feel low, where your biological functions like your eating, your sleeping is not so good. You are not able to enjoy things as you would do, and as a result of that, your performance may not be as good as you expect. And in some, you can see the change in behaviors, in terms of they either choosing to isolate, or they trying to postpone the things, or in terms of their self-care. So how do you manage the stress? Of course, everybody is different. There is no one particular means by which one can help managing the stress. It's a package which you will have to choose and use depending upon the situation and the context you are in. The NHS obviously supports what is called as the 5 ways to well-being, and you can obviously relate to some of these, which you may already be practicing, but it is important that you need to amplify that. And what are these? The first and foremost is relationships. Having people around you, having friends around you. It is very important that you talk about your feelings, your thoughts to your fellow colleagues, and that is really, really important. So everyone needs to have a good set of friends. The second thing is, again, be active. I mean, I know that university students are generally very, very active, and it is very, very positive. It is both in terms of mental health and also in terms of the physical health. I mean, you have opportunities to join into various kinds of groups, which are really positive. You can use time, in activities or in hobbies which you generally enjoy, like music, reading, in addition to sports and so on. Then is have time for yourself, reflect. It is very, very important. Do you have all the right skills in terms of identifying where your well-being is not the same, or where you are feeling that your stress levels are gradually increasing? So you should be able to notice, within yourself. There is a new concept called mindfulness, where people are able to focus more on what is happening at that moment, rather than focusing and worrying about things which are not definitely under their control. New learning is also very important. Have hobbies. Recently, when I went for swimming, I saw a old lady who was in 70s who had come for adult swimming lessons. I was really puzzled. So you need to have that enthusiasm, motivation, and skills for this new learning, which also helps with regard to well-being. And the last is being compassionate. Compassionate to yourself and also to your fellow colleagues. Be proud of what you have achieved, which will again contribute to your well-being. Say thank you to people, and also those who can afford some time, engaging in volunteering activities has really boosted in terms of their well-being. But it is not that it when you are in a situation which is more worse than your normal states, that is when you are stressed, how can you help yourself? Apart from having your routine, apart from using the skills in terms of time management and relaxation, what is very important is the last two bits. One is talk about your stress. When you talk about your feelings to your fellow colleagues, indirectly, you will find the solutions as well. You need to believe that for every problem there is always a solution, and tell yourself that it's okay not to be okay. It is not that you will be in the same state all the time. Yeah, we all go through different emotions at different time points, and when we are not okay, we need to have that optimism that we will come out of this, and don't hesitate to seek help when it is needed. And as I was saying in the beginning, as a university student and staff, you have the responsibility not just looking after yourself, but also looking after your community, because the research has well established that when the wellness of the community itself is very good, the productivity of the community is high. Okay, so and how do you do that? one is being aware and talking about it. Okay, so that is the key thing. And when somebody comes and says that they are stressed, don't brush it away. Give some time to talk to them and help to find solutions. And it's always good that if you identify any signs of distress in any of your colleague, talk to them and open it up. Yeah, so that the colleagues will feel very supported. I'm sure the university will have a lot of helplines to support. Similarly, there is a big campaign which is going on in Leicester, which is called "Are You Okay?" Usually during the pandemic and also during stressful situations, just meeting people whom you don't know and asking whether they are okay will mean something special for them. And lastly, I just want to end by saying that if you are concerned about any of your colleague who is not doing well, and if you feel that there are some risks, please let your concerned authorities know about it. So, in conclusion, no doubt university is the best part of your life. So, make best use of it. And every minute you spend in the university, you need to be very grateful for it. And you can make it more meaningful and more productive if you practice some of the principles of your own well-being. And that in itself will help in terms of improving the productivity of the community. What is again more important is being more compassionate and being more proud of yourself in terms of your achievements, which will have a positive impact on well-being. And if you come across stress, talk about it and be confident in finding solutions to your problems. I'll end here and I will hand it over to Professor Raghavan. I just want to say that, because of my other clinical commitment, I'm not able to stay here, but I wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kunigiri, in relation to your talk and also providing us with the valuable tips for mental health and well-being. And I think indeed, I think the statement that you made in relation to you're not alone and it is okay not to be okay. And also the ways that people can actually seek help through mindfulness, yoga, exercises, and many other kind of social activities is actually, there are important tips. So thank you very much for that. And I think it is important that we create that awareness of stress and distress and how we can promote well-being. So many thanks for that, Dr. Girish. Our next speaker in this session is Dr. Nadya Sridhanka. She's a senior lecturer in psychology at the Montfort University, and she is also deputy director of Mary Seacole Research Center, which is DMA's interdisciplinary research center focusing on mental health, diversity, and culture. Dr. Nadya's interest is in cultural identity and cultural psychology, and her work and publication reflect these themes. Nadya is a co-investigator in our ESRC GCRF funded project on mental health literacy in urban and rural Kerala in India using applied theatre methodology. She is also co-investigator for the ESRC funded Champions project, which is a national project looking at the impact of COVID and living through lockdown on children under 5 who are living in temporary accommodation and due to experiencing homelessness. She's also co-applicant on the Sesame Research Project with the Glasgow School of Arts, culturally engaged and sensitive approaches to mental health education for young people. So it's a pleasure to have you with us, Dr. Nadya, and she's going to talk about cultural mental health, diversity, and inclusion in research for equitable and sustainable impact. Welcome.
Great. Thank you very much, Raghu, for such a wonderful and warm introduction. And it's my pleasure and honor to be here today and to share this talk with everybody and have a conversation about mental health with DMU and external visitors to this talks. As Raghu has said, the talk for me today is around mental health, but particularly looking at the role of culture in mental health and how can we as researchers be more inclusive of diversity in the UK and around the world and promote meaningful and sustainable interventions and impact in communities. So the big important question at the beginning, of course, is, does culture actually matter for mental health? If we understand culture as a system of shared knowledge of customs, beliefs, and values, as a group of individuals, of people, we share an understanding of what something is, what we do with it. We can apply that very easily to our health, and particularly to our mental health, because we'll have those beliefs about it. As Girish and Raghu rightly said, we all have the responsibility to take care of our own mental health and recognize that we all have mental health. So I think it's quite uplifting and optimistic that we are having these conversations around that everybody has mental health and there's no health without mental health. However, what I would like to discuss today is that how we have mental health, how we seek treatment, how we understand it, is very much a product of this cultural worldview, this cultural capital that every single one of us has. And when we look at the literature, when we look at the research that has been done around this subject, we can see that there's a lot of evidence that culture influences quite a diversity of aspects of mental health, from symptomatology, presentation, and meaning making around mental health illness or mental health. So for example, different cultures might be more presenting with somatic and physical symptoms than, for example, emotional, psychological ones on the same mental health illness. We can see cross-cultural differences and similarities around causation for mental health illness. For example, we can see similar rates of schizophrenia across the world. However, certain cultures might have higher levels of PTSD, especially if we consider cultural trauma or intergenerational trauma that certain cultures and groups of people have endured due to history of violence, conflict, etc. As individuals, our coping and resilience mechanisms are very much dependent on the kind of coping strategies that are available to us, the ones that we have learned from our families, from our cultural groups, the ones that are available to us as through resources. Equally, our support systems will vary. So for example, the role of family in supporting our well-being or our mental health has different kind of position in that priority list of who do we go to when we need support with our mental health. Is it our families, our friends' networks? Is it more sort of mental health services? Equally, if we think about services, the availability of certain treatments, particular resources for how that treatment is delivered, where it is available, is also very much a product of what is normalized and accessible within a particular cultural context. The values and beliefs that I've mentioned earlier that underpin our cultural identity and that sharing of culture, while they come with certain benefits in terms of the links and in terms of coping strategies, they also can come with mistrust and stigma towards mental health illness or using mental health services, which is an issue, obviously, what we need to discuss, why that stigma is there, how do we combat cultural stigma around mental health illness and seeking particular lines of support. But I think it's also important to consider culture as a form of power. First of all, who has the culture is a product of a discourse, a product of a lot of theorizing, and some of the assumptions that are not particularly helpful when we do research or develop interventions for local communities. As Professor Dinesh Bokra in his recent publication with his colleagues have said, that in many countries, the use of the term culture and its application is still often perceived as being solely relevant to Black and minority ethnic groups and individuals, which fails to recognize that every individual is influenced by their culture, both in the broadest sense, but also various aspects of microcultures. So not dividing groups of people as those that having culture and those that don't. It enters that kind of power balance between minoritized individuals carry culture and the majority of people and individuals with more power, with more status, somehow are free of those cultural idioms. So It's important to challenge that and recognize that every individual carries the cultural capital with them that influences how they engage and how they understand mental health. It's also important to recognize that different roles that we have in discussing mental health, a lot of it can be about the individual that might need support with their mental health. Also, the clinician has their own cultural capital and their own cultural worldview that will influence how they interpret the conversation during triage, for example, or assessment, the way they communicate about mental health with their patients. A researcher will have a cultural worldview in a position as well, in terms of the kind of methodology we might use, the kind of groups we might do research with, how inclusive we are in our research of cultural diversity to actually have findings that speak to the diversity that we have in the context around us. So this status and acceptability of worldview that is subject to the powerful position of people having a conversation and dealing with mental health is very important, because individuals who are seeking maybe support from services, the users of mental health services, are sometimes challenged to establish and articulate their own reality and their own experiences, choice of treatment that is acceptable to their lifestyle, but also being heard, period. So these kind of relationships, these power balances, I guess, are also influenced by geopolitical relationships that you have between different contexts. The role of colonialism, for example, in low and middle income countries has a legacy that is sustained to this day. These imported worldviews, the Western dominance of the worldview around mental health, the prevalence of biomedical models need to be considered as something of a foreign, a Western culture, and more effort needs to be put into understanding local cultural processes. The consequences of not seeing this culture balance is creating invisible experiences. It is homogenizing the diverse experiences that certain individuals have with their mental health and not being inclusive of them when we're developing interventions, when we're doing research. It is insensitive to cultural changes that occur when we have clashes between cultures or contact between cultures, because we all are now living in increasingly culturally plural contexts, both in the topics that we study and how we study them, the type of measurement we might be using. We're missing out on very meaningful solutions and interventions that will be applicable to local contexts, that might increase in uptake in treatment, for example. And again, missing mutual learning and putting the burden of responsibility to speak up and sort those inequalities on the individuals affected by them. So there has to be a concerned and conscious effort to rebalance that. So this is something that we've done in the project, as Raghu said, the ESRC funded project called Me Help. So it's focusing on mental health literacy in India and looking at mental health literacy as a way of improving mental health problem recognition, service utilization, and reducing stigma in the state of Kerala in India. We have selected the state of Kerala because it's a very diverse context culturally and religious, quite a lot of religious groups within the state, but also as a model of where India wants to be. It's quite a well developed state, but has quite a high level of mental health problems. When we've done interviews, cultural narratives of users, carers, and community members, we found quite a diverse views on mental health. They've ranged from Western biomedical model perspectives to Ayurvedic humors as being explanatory for development of mental health illness, karmic or possession explanations, which also resulted in quite diverse methods of treatment options available to communities in the state. The issue, however, is that there's a clash between Western model of clinical training as well as and pillars of Indian culture, such as religion, family, spiritual practice, and care. So we've conceptualized mental health literacy being as a solution which is recognized quite widely in the literature, that traditionally improves understanding, resilience, sense of control, and help-seeking efficacy. So having good mental health literacy is beneficial for your mental health and your recovery. However, there are no cultural perspectives in mental health literacy. It's a very Western developed model. So when we've done the cultural narratives, what we found is that there's quite, again, plurality of options of treatment, plurality of understanding of what mental health is. Some say, for example, we have a participant who is a community member said they prefer offering to gods and puja over medicines. So they're recognizing that there's different methods of treatment and people have option in terms of which ones they are pursuing. There's a dot on the center of Guru Vajrayapan's forehead. If you meditate on this dot for 6 months, your mind will be able to concentrate. Again, certain religious spiritual practices allow the kind of temporal road to recovery with repetitive and controlled practices that will be beneficial to somebody's recovery. So here we see mental health literacy as not just sort of Western model of identification of mental health problems. What is depression? What is anxiety? Can you recognize it? But more of a cultural and religious and spiritual beliefs and their attendant practices and healing regimes as being more plural and more flexible than just recognizing disorders. So therefore, it's important as a consequence of this work to challenge the assumptions of ignorance if somebody cannot recognize schizophrenia, for example, and instead recognize working models of cultural traditions and local belief systems on mental health that exist within a cultural context. So when we have multiple mental health literacies that are fluid with context, that are role dependent depending on where the individual is coming from, and it speaks to their lived experiences and context, we can actually have more meaningful interventions and conversations about treatment options. So this perspective of multiple mental health literacies allows coexistence of scientific and cultural worldviews. They can operate in synergy and enable treatment and facilitate a sense of meaning and purpose in life. So I'd like to finish on is to reflect on the benefits of celebrating diversity in culture within our mental health research. First of all, it allows very rich mutual learning. And again, it becomes bi-directional. We're not doing research on people, we're doing research with them. And I'm sure Doreen is going to speak to some of that in the next talk. We also talk about inclusion and belonging and facilitating inclusion and belonging of research participants in the process and of patients within the clinical practice. Culturally integrated and innovative solutions and interventions only come when you pay attention to the cultural diversity of the people who are within the context. And therefore recalibrating these power systems, which have become anchored on lived expertise and cultural meaning of individuals that are seeking help with their mental illness. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nadya, for outlining the role of culture and integrating the cultural and belief systems into how psychiatry and how mental health need to be looked upon in shaping the help-seeking process and also intervention approaches. Culture shapes the way we think, and it's actually very important that it is actually absorbed and made useful and made a meaning in your life in relation to how we understand our mental health and well-being. So thank you very much for that, Nadya. Our next speaker is Dorian Joseph. Dorian describes herself as a Black British woman with over 30 years of mental health lived experience. She is an advocate, a campaigner, a trainer, a lecturer, a researcher, and a writer in race, mental health, and faith. She has worked with most of the national mental health organizations and some of the NHS trusts. She has published books and book chapters. One of the book chapters is actually with Professor Cam Bowie in a textbook on mind, state, and society, the social history of psychiatry and mental health in Britain since from 1960 to 2010. An excellent book published by the Cambridge University Press. I know Doreen as a co-applicant on the co-pact research project led by the University of Oxford, which explores evidence-based investigation and co-design of approaches to prevent and reduce mental health act use. And Dorian is actually a PPI, a patient public involvement co-applicant in that research project. Lovely to have met you and known you over the last year or so, Dorian. And Dorian is actually going to talk about globalizing psychiatry, not the best medicine, a contentious area this is. And I think it is very applicable in the way we actually look at Western psychiatry and how it needs to be adapting to the modern world. Welcome, Dorian.
Hi, Raghu, and hello, everybody else. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this session on World Awareness Day. We're talking about mental health. And as Raghu said, we're working together on COPACT currently under Oxford University. And it's really exciting time to be doing this research, especially looking at how the Mental Health Act is being implemented or used. And we know, in particular, Black men have a rough trot of dealings with psychiatry and mental health. So, my title, if we can have my first title, please. Thank you. So, psychiatry, globalization, a question, not the best medicine. And you can see from the picture the different approaches. So when I was first approached to talk about culturally appropriate mental health care, I began in good faith with that intention. However, as I thought more about it critically, about the presumption and that the understanding of mental distress as a mental ill health is a given, I realized that this is not universally accepted because other people and cultures have different interpretations. So I'll begin with what can be considered culturally appropriate, indeed what is considered good mental health care for all people in general, before I talk about the globalization and decolonization of psychiatry, and essentially other approaches to distress, with the premise that choice is an essential element of healthcare. Back in 2002, Sainsbury's Centre for Mental Health worked with survivor Paul Gray and others on the breaking circle of fear, and which felt by Black men and mental health professionals, especially in regard to schizophrenia. Paul pioneered a project called Inspiring Influence, I&I, where Black men who had used mental health services devised creative ways of their mental health care. It involved creating music, playing music, spoken word, even upskilling themselves in English, basic English, maths, and IT to improve their employability. And as we know how valuable being able to work and earn a living is for your self-esteem, your status, and your well-being. Then in 2011, J. Sridharka et al. Produced a Recovery and Resilience Report, R&R report, and it researched African Caribbean, and South Asian women's experience of mental distress. It explored how they were impacted by paternalism, cultural expectations, sexism, and racism. For these women, even having the opportunity to tell their stories was empowering, and in being cathartic, as well as being able to, through social action, to influence improvements in mental health care and services. I worked with Jayashree on this project, and as co-lecturer, I worked with Paul, lecturing on service user views and voices at Queen Mary's London over the years. One of my own books, Caring for Your Mental Health, 2019, beautifully illustrates many ways or approaches of self-care, another help by professional or alternative, holistic, and natural, spiritual, creative, and cultural practices. These include well-known healthy options like food, exercise, and dance, creativity and self-expression through word, music, arts and craft, faith and spirituality, and being good to yourself. A bit of pampering goes a long way. And this is instead of beating yourself up because of how you are made to feel by others, like professionals perhaps, or loved ones who think you're weak or defective or even infantile. Once hospitalized, you somehow lose your rights as an adult and are treated as incapable, without capacity. Whereas a loving, caring approach would regard you as a vulnerable and in need of TLC, which I call tender loving Christ. Indeed, what I've always said since I was first labelled schizophrenia over 30 years ago, what I needed and would have been best for me was peace, rest, and care and kindness, a tender, loving Christ approach in a beautiful nature sanctuary, even a soteria, which some of you may already know about, but it's worth looking up as an alternative to biomedical treatment. I would have preferred that instead of ECT, years of depot injections, and medications, which apparently is for life. So I have to stay on it for life. I did try to come off, but I have to be put back on it. So drugs apparently can't cure me. And not only that, it has toxic side effects. Weight gain is one of them, and leads to other illnesses such as diabetes and even stroke, which is also I suffered 7 years ago. Critics of psychiatry like Robert Whitaker, author of Mad in America, and others over the last 40 years, argue that happy pills, aka antidepressants, won't cure depression, but make people drug dependent instead, hooked on legal drugs. Not a good look. Could I have slide 2, please, Jane? Thank you. Control. Other researchers like Higginbottom and Marcella, 1987, have argued that cultural approaches such as Indian Ayurvedic and meditation, even massage, consider the whole person, mind, body, and spirit, not just the brain or the mind as psychiatry does. In fact, a holistic, person-centered approach, as reflected in the recovery model, is preferable to the biomedical model. Sadly, with Western psychiatry being pushed onto the global south, some of its worst treatments and side effects are also catching. I've been told that regressive practices are still being perpetrated, such as caging or shackling people to trees who are suffering uncontrollable distress in places like Nigeria and India. Essentially, fear is at the root of what drives intervention to control the unknown, the frightening, the uncontrollable behaviors, whether harm or violence to yourself or to others. Physical violence has been used to control them. Here in the West, other violent treatments or methods are employed. For example, ECT, as I mentioned, electroconvulsive therapy or treatment, lobotomies, restrictive practices, the chemical kosh medication through pills or injections, which basically tranquilize human beings as if they were wild animals. I speak more of this in another of my books, Perfect Circles, Volume 1, An Exploration of Faith and Relationships with Yahweh, our Heavenly Father, published 2013, Chapter 9. Forced to at least acknowledge that there may be other worldviews on how to understand and interpret distress. Said, 1978, Chakrabarty and Durrell, 2009, argue that Western psychiatry tries to control and mute them, and assimilate them into more familiar Western concepts, thereby synthesizing, homogenizing, and hierarchizing them, so that somehow the Occidental or Western approach is deemed superior to the Oriental or worldviews, aka the others. The above are quoted in China Mills 2014, her book, Decolonizing Global Mental Health, the Psychiatrization of the Majority World. Mills et al. Question why distress is conceived of as a deficit model of health, i.e. illness, in this case mental illness, when such displays may indicate resistance or protest as part of political or social dissent. I remember hearing in the 70s that in Russia, people were incarcerated in mental institutions, not because they were ill, but because they were anti-communist. So it can be political. Other cultures, like some in Africa or the Caribbean, interpret people who hear voices or have visions as being visionary, or wise men and women with special gifts and insight. Even biblical people like Joseph the dreamer and Daniel the prophet, patriarchs Abraham and Moses, heard the voice of Jehovah and saw visions. They were revered and believed. Conversely, some people have been demon-possessed, which, though frightening at least recognizes the existence of evil spirits and the spiritual realm. Regardless, the point is to acknowledge, appreciate, and value the majority worldviews as being just as valid as Western psychiatry, and that these may be as efficacious or even more so than psychiatric medications. Indeed, found in 1952 in Black Skin, White Mask held that it is psychiatry that is sick, because it seeks to control the brains of the colonized, who thereby internalize the negative perceptions that are imposed on them by racist constructs. I would adapt it to say black skins, white straitjackets, because psychiatry medicates black men in particular to constrain and restrain their free expression and liberty. Bob Marley's redemption song is still appropriate for black people to free ourselves from mental slavery. Question: who says that Western psychiatry is the best medicine for the rest of the world? Unfortunately, the World Health Organization is backing the pharmaceutical companies to push medications, legal drugs, which, by the way, have not been proven to be efficacious and have attracted criticism, onto the global south. This drive is without due regard for what other cultures are already doing to alleviate distress. Higginbottom and Marcella, 1988, noted that psychiatry, introduced into Asian countries as it is, discredits their existing healing sources, yet provide little to replace them, and it appropriates many of the resources made available for mental health in poorer countries. In fact, it has actually resulted in less help for the distressed. Please may I have the next slide? And if you keep clicking it, we'll get to the end. One other? Yeah. Another one? Thank you. We come back. Thank you. Decolonization, a holistic and humanized approach. So, other research suggests that the pluralism of approaches to distress may account for the better outcomes for the people labeled with schizophrenia in developing countries, Mills argues. Indeed, viewed by the West as dissent, other countries in the global south, for example South Africa and India, are critical of and are rejecting Western pressure to globalize psychiatry that is deemed culturally inappropriate for them. They insist that they can choose which approach works best for them. The WHO's pressure is limiting their choices of interventions and restricting their autonomy. Choice is an essential element of healthcare. These countries eschew the biomedical approach, preferring holistic worldview ones to distress, which elevate, nurture, and heal the person in mind, body, and spirit, the whole human being. The person can be gently nurtured to health and well-being, rather than medicated, tranquilized, and controlled. Let interventions be humanized. As I always say, there is life after mental distress, and one that can be wholesome, fulfilling, and enabling. Rather than be restricted, we should have the choice of what healthcare we prefer, whether in the global south or as members of the minority populations in the West. That would give us more culturally appropriate mental and physical healthcare. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Dorian. That's such an insightful talk on the global mental health context, and who says that the Western medical model is actually beneficial for all. I think that question is yet to be answered. And I think, yes, you rightly put it, the inequality is actually experienced by the Black and minority ethnic communities in the UK is a key example in terms of how the Western psychiatry does not actually understand the cultural context and the spiritual dimension of individuals. So thank you very much for your insightful dialogue and thoughts in relation to how we can actually overcome that. I'm sure this is going to continue. It'll be something that will be taking up in the questions. Our next and our final speaker is Professor Brown, a friend and colleague who is an international figure in health humanities. Professor Brown is a professor of health communication, and his work looks at theoretical and epistemological perspectives in the social and health sciences, mental health issues, interpersonal relationships, qualitative methodologies, as well as sociology and health studies more broadly. He has completed 13 books and around 90 refereed journal articles and invited book chapters. Most notably, his books have included the groundbreaking The Health Humanities Companion. Significant contribution to this field also include evidence-based health communication. As well as healthcare, his publications have ranged across the fields of linguistics, education, sociology, as well as finding new ways for the arts and humanities to contribute to the variety and vitality of health and care. The core of his work has focused on the interpretation of human experiences across a variety of different disciplines and settings, including education, healthcare, philosophy, and the arts in health, exploring how this may be understood with a view of improving practice and with regard to theoretical development and social sciences. I had the pleasure of working with Brown on a number of projects, and we'll still continue to work on the projects and publications. And it's a great pleasure to actually welcome Professor Brown to do this talk on Beyond Care Burden, on making sense of symptoms and services when loved ones has a problem. Welcome you, Brown.
Thank you very much indeed, Raghu, for such a generous introduction. Yes, it's a great pleasure to be here today amongst such distinguished company, and there was much I could agree with and empathize with in the previous speakers' talks. So far, we've been talking about people with mental health problems or oneself as someone who may suffer from mental health problems. But in this final section of the symposium, I'd like to focus upon informal carers. Now, there's a great deal of informal care going on in Britain. Carers UK, the Carers Charity, estimates that there are something like about 7 million carers in total, and around 1.5 million people may be caring for someone with a mental health problem or a neurodegenerative disorder. No matter how intensive the treatment people are in receipt of from the statutory services, still a great deal of the day-to-day care they will experience comes from loved ones, family members, possibly community members or close friends. People may be caring for their children, people may be caring for distressed or disorientated partners, people may be caring for parents, and so on. There's a great deal of this informal care going on. Indeed, Carers UK estimates that if you actually had to pay somebody to do all this informal care, the cost would be 123 billion. Would probably cost as much as the NHS itself. So there's a great deal of informal care going on, but although research on caring has taken off in the last few years, we're still very much dealing with terra incognita, something that's going on in households, communities, and social groups, but we don't necessarily know very much about what happens. Now, a little while ago, as part of a project looking at the role of the arts and humanities in facilitating recovery for people with mental health problems, I was privileged to have a series of conversations with informal carers. In total, there were 31 of these. Around about 2/3 of them were women and 1/3 men. They were caring for a variety of people, occasionally older parents, sometimes their partners, sometimes their offspring. And these were deliberately not focused on a particular condition. like carers for people with schizophrenia or carers for people with depression. First of all, because I recruited people informally through a kind of snowballing technique. And second of all, because it turned out some of the people they cared for had had a number of different diagnoses along the way, bipolar disorder and borderline personality disorder, autism and anxiety and depression, and so on. This comorbidity, people acquiring multiple disorder labels, is not all that uncommon. In real life, people's problems are often complex and multidimensional and don't necessarily always fit the textbook definitions. People discussed their daily lives, the process of trying to make sense of their loved one's problem, the engagements they and their loved one had with health services, with social care services, and sometimes the charitable and voluntary sector too, the caring process, what it meant, and so on. Now, one of the things that struck me about these conversations was how articulate, how complex, and how nuanced people were in making sense of their own lives as carers. Now, there's a growing literature about informal care, but a lot of this focuses upon carer burden and carer stress, as if that was a homogeneous, unidimensional construct. Oh, well, it's the stress of getting people in and out of the bath, it's the stress of getting people to hospital appointments, those kinds of things. However, it seemed to me on the basis of these conversations that there was a lot of knowledge being curated and deployed. These were very cognitive activities. One might almost say, because they were about knowledge, epistemological activities. They're about making sense of the problem, about making sense of how services work, about managing knowledge in various ways. Now, a few other authors have started to concentrate on this, but it's mainly to do with trying to get carers to subscribe to a medico-psychotherapeutic view of what's going on, rather like my colleague Nadya was saying about the notion of mental health literacy a few minutes ago. It's about trying to get people signed up to this kind of view of the problem, and about trying to get carers involved in medication adherence. Make sure he keeps taking the tablets. Make sure she keeps turning up for her depot injections, and so on. Whereas what carers are often doing is a bit more sophisticated than this. I'd just like to share with you some quotes from some of the people who spoke to me. For example, here's someone talking about a child with developmental difficulties. He ended up with diagnoses of autism and ADHD, but it was quite a long process, so she told me, of reaching that assessment and reaching the sources of help and support that were available. We always knew, we always had the sense that there was something wrong. Just the way he learned to walk and talk. It seemed like it was much later than the other kids at the playgroup. And the other kids noticed there was something a bit odd about him. So the sense that there's something wrong, and then it's a process of trying to persuade the professionals to take these concerns seriously. This isn't unique to my participants. This has been noted elsewhere, particularly when parents are seeking care for children. Now, I found the most use was people whose kids had already been through it. At least they knew what to do, who to talk to and that. Even, and this sounds silly, even the right kinds of symptoms, because if you don't have the right kinds of symptoms that are on their checklist, they don't want to know. So it's quite a complicated and sophisticated process going on of making sure the problem takes the right shape and form that professionals are equipped to respond to. In fact, I've not put up a quote about this, but the people said things like, oh, well, people were saying, when it's a child who's having an assessment interview, give him coffee, give him orange squash, give him sugar, in the hope that the right kinds of symptoms will be exhibited in the assessment interview that will get them the assessment that they're hoping for. It's as if people were using a complex ethnopharmacological knowledge. Out there in the literature, the relationship between, say, sugar and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is a bit more complicated and somewhat uncertain. But no, give him sugar. So getting the kind of assessment that you want involves a complex management of sometimes rather subversive, if you will, kinds of knowledge. Now, okay, so let's suppose you're taking care of somebody who's got through the threshold, got past the gatekeepers, who is in receipt of services. This may still be a rather complex and difficult process. Here's somebody called Jo who described to me how her partner Mike had a number of admissions to hospital over the years with problems that had sometimes been described as schizophrenia and sometimes paranoid schizophrenia, sometimes that old chestnut borderline personality disorder, and so on. Now, here she's describing an occasion when Mike was discharged from hospital, and it turned out to be at a very inconvenient time for people such as them who relied on public transport. It was a bank holiday, apparently. They couldn't have afforded a taxi. Well, as she says, it was before Uber and everything, that is even. And because they were on low incomes, on benefits, the prospect of putting themselves up for a night in a hotel was completely out of the question. And she put this down to the fact that healthcare personnel, people who worked in the hospital, it hadn't really occurred to them that this would be a difficult thing to do. It's like they just don't think about it. They've all got cars and whatnot. So for people who have to rely on public transport, it's much more problematic. So she described how they had to spend the night in a bus station until the buses started running again. So we spent hours in the bus station with the drunks and that until eventually the buses started running again. And all the while I was thinking, oh my God, I hope nothing happens to set him off again. So here's somebody who's had an episode of hospitalization, who's perhaps still in a somewhat vulnerable and volatile state. And the stress of having to spend the night in the bus station, oh, maybe it'll set him off again. And this kind of thing, managing the gap or hysteresis between what the services provide and what you think your loved one needs is often an important part of being an informal carer. Indeed, some people felt that somehow there was better care going on somewhere else, but it was just that they weren't getting it. Another person said to me something along the lines of, well, if you look at the doctors and nurses around here, one of the things they don't do is let any of their relatives go to the local hospital. So some people were being quite critical of services. Whereas this might seem critical, it probably also reflects the high esteem in which the NHS is held in this country. People's expectations were very high, and they were trying to make sense of the fact that their experience as informal carers and the experience of their loved ones somehow didn't quite measure up to their expectations. Maybe there was better care going on somewhere else, but they just weren't able to access it. But another thing that struck me from the conversations with carers and reinforced this notion that caring in an important respect was about managing knowledge was something that a participant called Diana says here. She was talking about her partner whom she was looking after. I think it was predominantly an anxiety disorder he seemed to suffer from, but it was sufficiently severe that he'd not been able to continue working. And she talks about something that is just starting to emerge in the literature, where people talk about friction in the caring relationship, conflict in the caring relationship. And another thing about her partner is he was becoming increasingly disabled with arthritis as well. So he was finding his physical movement was being restricted too. And so she described how he was becoming increasingly anxious about who she was speaking to and who she was relating to. He goes through my phone. I tried putting a password on it, but of course that makes him worse. He looks at all the numbers who I've called, who's called me and everything. And they're all people I'm planning to cheat on him with, as far as he's concerned. When really, they're just people at work or people at the Mind Carers group or what have you. There, I've caught you out in a lie, he says, as if he's won something. And she felt this was something that she couldn't really share with anybody else outside the relationship. You can't tell anyone. Well, I suppose she was telling me, but there was this sense that you can't really talk about friction or conflict in the caring relationship. I must admit that hearing her say this, I found myself a little bit worried on her behalf. This would meet the threshold of what we would now call coercive control in the context of domestic violence. And after we'd done the interview, I did suggest to her that, would you like to try and do something about this? There are a whole variety of organisations set up to help women in your position. And she said, "No, don't worry about it. No, I'm not going to be. No, what was it? I'm not afraid of that silly old beggar," she said of her husband. So she didn't want to do anything about it. She wasn't going to contact Women's Aid or anything. But there's this idea of conflict in the caring relationship, and that it's somehow something that's got to be a secret. You've got to keep it away from other people. Okay, so conversations with carers then, which seem to be conversations about knowledge. Okay, they were about stress, they were about burden as well, but in important respects, they were about knowledge. They talked about, as we've just indicated, shaping symptoms so as to make the best of the assessment process, speculating about what the professionals know and what they don't know. The professionals might know where to get better care if they need it for their loved ones. The professionals have a checklist in front of them, so if you can fit the tick boxes on the checklist, then you might get the kind of help that you're aiming for. Managing knowledge in interpersonal relationships. Now, when it was people caring for a child, they didn't seem to mind talking about the child's potential impairments and problems and developmental difficulties. On the other hand, when it was a partner, like with the example we've just discussed, when it was a partner, it was as if you can't tell people about conflict in the caring relationship. There are boundaries that people manage in knowledge. Some people also talk about things that nobody ever tells you. Nobody ever tells you that you're in for a really long, hard slog. If you watch this on TV, if you see things in soap operas, somebody's having a crisis in one episode, and then a couple of episodes later, they've had a really good talk with their best friend, and then it's somebody else's turn to have a crisis. But in real life, it goes on and it goes on and it goes on past the point of exhaustion. It goes on for years. So in this respect, I hope I've given you a little bit of an insight into what some of my participants thought it was like caring for somebody with a mental health problem, with a long-term mental health problem. It's enormously hard work, but it wasn't always hard work. Sometimes there was a sense of accomplishment from having cared for somebody better than anybody else could, better than the statutory services could. Trying to get things the way that he or she liked them. Indeed, one could almost say that in some respects, some people were experiencing a carer's high, if you can imagine such a thing. Okay, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I'll draw to a close there.
Thank you very much, Brown, for highlighting the issues of the care burden and also the hidden workforce, the hidden and silent workforce, I should actually say, and how we have to actually work together with the carers in creating that knowledge and support that would be beneficial for all. So thank you very much for that. Now let's all come together and we will have a discussion, a panel discussion. Any questions? So, Brown, I think there is a comment from the viewer asking to make contact with you, really. Interesting.
Okay, yes. I'm. You can find me on the university website. The email is quite easy to remember. It's just brown@dmu.ac.uk. Yes, and Raj GH says a little bit about what he does. So I assume you're a he. I hope I'm not misgendering anybody. Yes, by all means, do drop me a line, and maybe we can talk some more.
Thank you for that. Right. I think in terms of there is a kind of discussion around. We have 15 minutes or so where we can actually engage in a kind of very fruitful discussion about the cultural psychiatry, how Western psychiatry need to move forward, and how the carers issues need to be taken in that kind of context, really. So, I think I would like to, if there are no comments coming on, I think I would like to kind of invite Doreen to say a few words in relation to how we might actually move forward in terms of, you mentioned about the issues around global psychiatry, and in a nutshell, what should we be doing in terms of moving forward to make it more culturally and spiritually appropriate for people?
Well, I think really we need to have recognition and appreciation for what the rest of the world, the majority world, has to offer. And yes, there may be still some traces of traditional regressive approaches to people who are experiencing mental distress, and obviously people are frightened, people don't really understand what's going on. But medication is not always the way forward. Counseling was really helpful for me. Therapy to a degree, but counseling, not psychotherapy, but just general counseling, that was helpful. It helped me place my situation in the context of other people that I wasn't the only person going through it, and how I had some coping techniques that were offered to me that I could help if some experiences of distress reappear. I think also the community, people say Asian communities and Black people are all family orientated, community based, and all of that. That is not a joke. In Africa, it takes a village to raise a child. It's not just like a nuclear family has in the West. But and I know families can have their own problems as well, because relationships, any kind of relationship, can be up and down, can be toxic, can be wholesome. We just have to take it as it comes. But to really value things that are spiritual, we are three part. We are mind, body, and spirit. We're not just the brain. And as I said, some of the chemicals can be toxic and have side effects, and we have to deal with that and live with that. And as I said, I had a stroke. I have diabetes, so this is a secondary illness to the label schizophrenia. I have to live with that the rest of my life. And also things like music. Music could be classical music, could be African, Ghanaian high life, calypso, Bhangra, all these different things. People's getting involved with playing the instrument, composing music, getting involved with writing, people writing your story, telling your story, singing your story, whichever way. And we have social media now. We can put things on video and YouTube channels and stuff like that. We can share how we get through the day. Basically, it's getting through the day and getting through the challenges that face us every day, and getting through the relationships, some of them which have more meaning to us than others, and some are more important to us than others. But we, as somebody, I think you said earlier on, and Girish said earlier on, we all have mental health. Being the mentality of us, our mental side of our intellect is important. It is part of it, but not at the expense of our spiritual well-being and our physical well-being, and to respect each other. African, Asian, Chinese, American Indian, Aboriginal, we're not objects. We're not the others. We're not the inferior. We are equally, equitably as important as anybody in the West. And really, that is a perspective that we have to come. We can't become with a Eurocentric worldview and spreading it to everywhere. Afrocentric, Asian-centric, all these are important. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dorian. I think that sort of highlight the negligence of taking into account the cultural factors, and also in terms of looking upon people as people, not from different minorities or whatever, looking as people and what actually helps them. And the way I think we need to try and shift or move away from the medicalization of mental health and well-being, and I think that is very important. And I think Nadya also touched on that, and I think she may have something to actually contribute to that in relation to the mental health literacy angle. She sort of explained the mental health literacies as a concept that we should be looking at.
But I think that I completely agree with Doreen with what she's saying in terms of the richness of the cultural practice, and particularly creative output and creative practice that is so diverse and so rich, but also has so much to offer in understanding ourselves and understanding our mental states, our emotions, our behaviors, not necessarily with mental illness, but also just in our states of wellness, isn't it? That aspect of it as well. But yeah, so mental health literacy, I think, come from into that kind of angle as well, is that sort of repertoire of understanding, of knowledge, of practice that exists in the context, and that's not one governing mental health literacy that is applicable to all. I think again, it's challenged that universality of experience of mental health, because we don't have that. We don't have, and I think a lot of our research is coming to that conclusion. There is no universality of mental health, and everybody constructs their mental health and well-being in their own way, and that kind of repertoire of knowledge, of practice, can coexist in parallel with a different one. And you have an option to pick from different ones in terms of what is applicable to you, and design your own journey, so to speak, to recovery and to wellness. And I think it's important to give equal footing for these perspectives and for these repertoires, and not say this one is the right one and this one you shouldn't do because it's local and spiritual and it's not medical and therefore not robust. I think we do need to challenge that narrative.
Yeah, I think that's very true in terms of actually looking at respecting people, and also looking at the diversity of approaches that could be actually utilized, because there is no one size fits all approach here in relation to things. And I think it's how we actually try and use that. There are a couple of comments from the participants as well in terms of how art therapy has actually helped them, and also somebody agreeing with Doreen in relation to the cultural sensitivity of services and person-centered and whole person support approaches. They are vital, and I think it is the argument that we've been making over the years is that it's taking us a slow progress, and I think for some of us, we want to change tomorrow. We don't have to wait for another 50 years for all these things to happen. We want to change tomorrow. And I think on that note, I think I'll go to Brown. Obviously, he is a kind of a knowledgeable friend of ours in relation to how we create that knowledge around these things.
Right, yes. I was just looking at the comments as well. Yes, there's somebody called Alison Wood making these comments about her partner and his benefit from art therapy and music, and that's very much aligned with our experience in our project Creative Practices Mutual Recovery, where we had things like sculpture and photography, and there was a music project down at the Royal College of Music in London, and a few other things. And yes, these did indeed seem to make a difference to people's well-being and their social connectedness. There's another comment I'd just like to pick up on. 07 Labelle, if I'm pronouncing you correctly. If you're concerned about family members' care, is there a governing body we can contact? Well, this will depend on who the care provider is. If it's an NHS trust, they're supposed on their website to have details of the complaints procedure, is one thing. If it's really bad, like you fear that somebody in a care home has been assaulted or something like that, there's always the option of contacting the police. There's the Care Quality Commission itself. I have to say that us academics these days have been perhaps a little bit wary of exposing care that's gone wrong. Journalists, on the other hand, turn up for jobs as care assistants with concealed cameras and you get a panorama program about it. But those kinds of exposures are going on, well, you know, with many organizations. If you want to hit them where it really hurts, generate some bad publicity about them.
Thank you, Brown. I think we have just about 4 minutes to have another comment on the question from the viewer. Interesting to link Dr. Girish's between stress and mental health. But other panel, I think we have an opportunity to maybe address that in terms of how should we be focusing more on people's stress management. I think so. Yes, I think it is understand more about stress and well-being. And I think because not everything is actually related to an illness mode. That's what I've been talking about, medicalization of mental health and medicalization of stress, really. So I think it's important that we actually understand the stress factor. And I'm sure that our panel have a view on that. Doreen?
That's right. When I first got diagnosed back in 1990, circumstances like financial, mortgage, all sorts of stuff was going on. And for me, it was the stress of all those different impacting on me, which led me to have a nervous breakdown. So it was the stresses. And he said, but then I got the label schizophrenia because I was hearing voices or I was having visions. But to me, I am a person, I have premonitions anyway, and I have dreams, and that's part of my life. And it isn't all negative, but it became negative when violence was attached. People were at risk, myself was at risk, my children were at risk. But stress management, we are too busy these days. We haven't got, even today, the phone keeps ringing, the text pops up, you just lie down, close your eyes, ping, ping, ping. We're working 24/7. No longer is it 9 to 5. We have unsociable hours working. You're always on tap, you're always available, you're always running here, there, and everywhere. It's too much. We need to say no. We need time to say, we don't have to say yes to everybody. We don't have to be the people pleaser. We can actually say, no, I've got to take time out for myself and look after my own health, physical health and mental health. Time out and pampering. I like the pampering bit. And I like the swimming and the knitting and the writing and all that stuff and the music, and just be yourself, just chill, and organize your day, your week, your month so that you have time out. You give yourself time out because other people won't give it to you. You have to take it out yourself. Thank you.
Thank you. I think stress is a killer, and I think important understanding the stress that we actually experience is the key in terms of well-being. A quick word from you, Nadya, and a quick word from you, Brown, in about a minute.
Yeah, just very quickly, I completely agree with Doreen. I think establishing those boundaries is very important. There's quite a lot of interesting research coming in terms of how we understand our own stress, and obviously not with everything. And, I'll be the first one to be in a panic mode and stressing about the things I need to do. But reframing how we see stress actually has physical consequences, but benefits. It will mediate how much stress affects our bodies. So if we look at stress as something that is a challenge that you can rise to, is something that you can manage, and we train ourselves to see it differently, not as this glorified stress that is going to kill us and impact our well-being and our health, it does have physical consequences. So I think it's important to see that we actually have power and control of how we see certain stressors, and maybe train ourselves to see them as challenges and opportunities, as opposed to something that is going to be having a negative effect. And there's power in that psychology for our benefit.
Thank you, Nadya. A quick word from you, Brown, in about a few seconds.
Okay, yeah, somebody's just asked me a question in the comments, so I'll attend to that if I may. Did I find any differences in how people coped if the cared for person passed away? Well, in the interviews I was talking about just now, these are all people who are current carers, so they weren't talking about bereavement. On the other hand, just more anecdotally and informally, amongst friends and acquaintances, I've certainly noticed that it leaves a big gap in people's lives. If you've organised your life around looking after somebody and then they're not there anymore, it's like, half your life has disappeared. And I've come across people who still do if you will, some of the rituals that they established when they were a carer, like getting up at a particular time, like going shopping on a particular day when, the person they were looking after used to go to the respite centre and those kinds of things. I think also the construction of meaning is very important. The people who seem to be able to cope best are those who say, well, so-and-so isn't with us anymore, but I know I was able to make the last years of his life as good as I could. I enabled her to live with dignity, that kind of thing, in a way which, if they were reliant wholly on institutional care, perhaps they wouldn't have been able to.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming to this seminar on World Mental Health Day event at DMU 2021. Thank you, Doreen. Thank you, Professor Brown and Dr. Nadya, for your valuable contribution and knowledge sharing exercise in this slot. Wait for this. Watch this space. We'll have more of it. And thank you all for supporting us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.